And so I indicated that we would take a look at the 5 values that make up the building blocks of the new evangelization. And we're going to take a look at those 5 values over a period of time. In today's session, we're taking a look at the first 2, discipleship and witness. Now, the first value of discipleship, when we presented it as part of our overall plan for the year, we put in brackets Christ-centered formation. Christ-centered formation. Because discipleship isn't just any discipleship, it's Christian discipleship. So in order maybe for us to speak about Christian discipleship, it may be good to say a few things about the word itself. One of the things that I've discovered over the years when we speak in church is that, like in many other institutions, we have developed our own vocabulary. And so we have a kind of jargon that we're familiar with. When you get to church, you start talking Catholic, you know, as opposed to French or English or German. You talk Catholic when you get to church. And some people understand Catholic. But we're getting to the point where more and more people don't. It's become like a foreign language. And so it's important sometimes to get back to the original meaning of words, or we have to explain some of those words. Maybe this is because of the fact that I spent 25 years of my life teaching, and I think words are important. So when we talk about discipleship, before we speak of Christian discipleship, what is it that the word disciple signifies? What is the meaning of the word disciple? Are we maybe taking too much for granted in our churches and in our communities when we use that word? Now, I've already spoken about the mandate to make disciples. Well, what are we making? You know, if you're going to bake a cake or you're going to make a pizza, you got to know what's involved. Otherwise, you don't know what you're going to do with it. So a disciple, I think, is a word that appears to be understood until you ask someone, what does it mean? And then we kind of, you know, not sure. Well, if we accept to go on this mission that the Lord has asked us, if we are going to make disciples, we need to have an understanding of what it is that we are being asked to do. The short answer to the question, what is a disciple, is it's a person who is a follower. A person who is a follower. A person who has come in contact with a significant master and teacher, and has committed himself or herself to that individual and to that individual's tenets and teachings. A disciple is one who adheres to the principles and the message of the one who is the master. And I keep using the word master because that's an important word. Master means someone who has actually figured out whatever that subject is about. You master playing the piano. You master painting. You master many things. But what it really means is that you've acquired a competency which is more than just the ability to do certain things. I mean, I can, you know, nail 2 pieces of wood together, but it doesn't make me a master carpenter. So to be a master is an important word as well. You can't understand discipleship without understanding what it means to be a master. And so one who is a disciple is one who goes to learn from. And not only learns from, but accepts the teaching. And secondly, assists in the propagation of that teaching. You become engaged. You become militant because you have been touched by that teaching and by that master's way of seeing things and understanding things, that it actually has altered your own self-definition. So to be a disciple, the short answer is to be a follower. But there's more to following than just walking behind. There's a kind of allowing for the matter to become your own. So you can have disciples of all kinds of different masters. And as I was preparing some of this, I found myself thinking of the people that I've met over the years who were disciples of Karl Marx. I studied in Switzerland, and I spent time there, and one of the area of work that I worked on, and developed a thesis on, was something called the Christian Marxist dialogue. And I encountered in this school in Switzerland, in Geneva, people who were disciples of Karl Marx. The guy that I ended up studying and reading was a guy named Roger Garaudy. And he was an interesting guy. He was the theoretician for the French Communist Party. And we were discussing the meaning of hope from a communist perspective and the meaning of hope from the Christian perspective. Right? And so we got into all of this, and it was all very interesting stuff and so on, and that's where the notion of dialogue was an important piece. But my point here is that here was this guy who was a disciple of Karl Marx. And he was as convinced of the value and the vision and the outcome of what Karl Marx was suggesting as I was convinced of the Christian outlook and the Christian perspective. He was a disciple. You could be a disciple of Sigmund Freud. The reason I chose that one is because when I did my doctorate in pastoral theology and psychology and psychotherapy, which is one of my deformations, right? And at the heart of that is the whole psychoanalytic movement, which has marked the 20th century and maybe the 21st century like no one else has. How many times do you use in your own everyday vocabulary psychological references? Oh, that person is depressed. Well, how do you know? What definition of depression are you using? You know, is it clinical depression? Is it, low-grade depression? What are you talking about? We use psychological language and we don't even realize we're using it. But you can be a disciple of that school of thought. But you might be a disciple of Carl Rogers, or you might be a disciple of Carl Jung. So a disciple is someone who has not only learned the theory, but has also somehow become able in the practice of that which is being proposed. And the other person that came to mind that I thought of that could be a master, of which many are now disciples, whether they realize it or not, is Marshall McLuhan. The reason why I thought of him is because I knew that we would be involved in media exercises here today. What was his famous line?
The medium is the message.
The medium is the message. Now, that's an important piece, but if you're a disciple of that man, what he does is he forms you in thinking and accepting that who you are is absolutely essential and significant in putting across whatever it is that you need to put across. Now, that one applies to us perhaps more than the others, right? Because Marshall McLuhan, who was a Catholic, whose background was quite strongly Catholic, he used to go to Mass every day, and he had a very, very deep understanding of what sacraments are. And so when he says the medium is the message, he's actually defining in modern language what a sacrament is. Remember the definition of old? A sacrament is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. The sign is the medium, and the medium produces the outcome, the message or the grace. So his Catholic background informed him, and those who studied under him, they don't realize it, but sometimes some of them are anonymous Catholics without realizing it, you know. So the point then of discipleship is to understand that disciple and discipleship is a relationship. A disciple is someone who is in a relationship with the one that he is following and learning from. Now, Christian disciple and Christian discipleship. It applies. You are a follower of Christ. But what does that mean? When we look at the apostles and the friends of Jesus, and it meant spending 3 years with him, it meant eating with him, it meant walking all over the Holy Land with him, it's going through the ups and the downs and the criticisms and the fears and everything else. Following the Lord means having a personal appreciation of who Jesus Christ is. The question was that Jesus asked, who do people say that I am? And then, who do you say that I am? And whatever the people say, and whatever you say, may sometimes be the same, but sometimes it's different. And the importance for us who are in the business, hopefully, of trying to pass on the message is that we are able to answer that question significantly for ourselves. Because you can't give what you don't have. Right? So, who is Jesus Christ, and how has Jesus Christ impacted on you? That's at the heart of discipleship. Now, I was trying to find an analogy and an experience that I thought most of you would immediately appreciate. And what came to mind is to say this, that Christian discipleship is comparable to the experience of falling in love. Falling in love. Now, the falling in love part can take that amount of time. But then learning to be loving and turning this moment into something else, that requires a little bit more time, maybe a week or two. All right? Maybe a week or two. Unfortunately, some of the people that are getting married these days, those who are still getting married, they're at the falling in love part. Right? But with Christ, Christian discipleship means moving from the personal encounter to the personal relationship. And the relationship is the one that is part of making disciples. So when you go and make disciples, you're not just bringing people to experience the falling in love part. It starts there. But then you've got to somehow accompany the person and help the person develop something that is a little bit more substantial, something that's a little bit more stable. And what happens when that happens, when that relationship occurs? Well, what happened to you? That's where it's possible to make the connections. And what we're talking about here is not something that you're going to find in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Because I'm talking about what's happened to your heart and to my heart, and then the Catechism of the Catholic Church kind of sheds a beam on it and says, oh yeah, that's what happened. Okay? But it's not putting out those words that's going to necessarily make this happen. Now, when I look at this and I consider it in terms of my own, the relationship with Jesus Christ changed my life. It changed my life. I wouldn't be here if that hadn't happened. It also altered my priorities. The things that I thought were important were no longer important. And to summarize, because it's a long story, right? Ultimately, what it did is that it redefined my identity. Now, for me, this whole business of identity is a really important piece. I said I did some work in psychology and therapy and all that kind of stuff. Well, part of my work was on identity and identity formation. Part of that is because of my immigrant background. When I arrived here with my parents, I was a kid, and I lived in an environment which was totally different from the environment that everyone else was in. And so growing up, I had a real struggle to figure out, am I Italian? Am I French? Am I English? And I remember years later in a homily saying, now it depends on which side of the bed I get up in the morning. Because all of those things are there. But the struggle was that for a long time, I didn't want to be Italian. And someone told me, how could you not be Italian? Everything about you says it, you know. You're Italian. Yeah, but and I'm living in a French world, and I went to English schools. But English schools in Montreal meant that I went to a school where everyone was Irish. Now, that's another contradiction. How can you be English and Irish, But that's what happened. And so, growing up, I know more Irish songs than I know Italian songs. I went to visit Ireland because I wanted to connect with some of these places, like, Donegal and other, Northern Ireland and whatever. Identity was a real issue. And it came together when I was able to zero in on the piece that was really the most significant piece of who makes or what makes me, me. Oh yeah, the Italian is there and the French is there and the English is there. But central to the experience in terms of identity formation was the coming to terms with who Jesus Christ is in my life. That's what Christian discipleship is about. So Jesus invites a person to follow him. We hear that all the time. When the person accepts to do this, it involves a whole lot of different choices. Now, St. Luke captured that. In Luke chapter 9, verse 23. Then Jesus said to them all, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. How many choices and decisions are in that short verse? Do you want to be my disciple? Are you ready to deny yourself? Free to take up the cross daily, whatever that is, and then follow me. Well, that's what is at stake here. No wonder there's a whole lot of people who don't want to have anything to do with this, right? Because what's being asked is not easy or simple. For all of us who are being asked to engage in this challenge, then we need to be able to somehow be disciples ourselves, consciously and with intentionality, because it involves the denial, the daily commitment, and the walking the walk. So if you're teaching catechism in your parish, and those three things are not there, then all you're doing is speaking words. And the words are good, but the substance behind the words somehow gets missed. So in our efforts of the new evangelization, in the task of making disciples, it involves creating opportunities for people to fall in love with Christ. Because it starts with falling in love. It's not primarily about doctrine. It's not primarily learning by heart every part of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And at least in the first phase, it's about being struck by the, well, what struck you when you fell in love? The beauty of the person, the handsomeness of the person, the intelligence of the person, whatever it is. The first one is the falling in love. Then it's about learning more and more about the person. So the transmission of the faith, which is what the Synod is all about, it's what we've been talking about, that's the heart of the new evangelization, is to transmit the faith. It's not firstly about doctrines and creeds, nor is it about outward appearances. It's not about learning the signs and the symbols. It's about touching the heart of another. I'm just going to say very quickly here, what I'm talking about is the creed. Credo. Some of you have heard me say this before. In Latin, credo means two words, do dare, to give, cor cordis is heart. The creed is a profession of faith, which means I am publicly saying, I give my heart to God, the Father Almighty. I give my heart to Jesus Christ. I give my heart to the Holy Spirit. So you notice what that does. It totally changes what the profession of faith is all about. It's about declaring your love. And you can't declare your love if the love isn't there to declare. When Jesus says, I have come that you might have life, that's why we say, okay, I'll follow you. Does that make sense? So that's what we're going to try to do with this discipleship business. It's about being a disciple. And at the end of it, if you're a disciple by choice and by conviction, you are able to stand up and say, I am a Christian. And that's where we're trying to get to with the discipleship challenge and the discipleship value.